Good evening. I went to urgent care after morning assembly this morning. Not because there's anything drastically wrong with me, but I knew I was having an issue and needed to get some prescription meds. And I may not feel quite right now. So we'll see how well I do or don't get through this sermon, but I hope you'll bear with me, and I hope I get through it well enough that I didn't need to say anything and you wouldn't have known anything. Whose admiration do you like to have? Who is it that approves of something you do and you really like the fact that they approved of what you do? Well, it is good to, it's a good feeling and a positive feeling, and not for necessarily bad reasons, to have others around us appreciate who we are, what we do, things we've said. But some people maybe have a little too much of that. They really want the admiration, the approval of other people, to hear words of praise from other people. If someone admires you and someone says in front of other people that they admire you, this person over here is hearing that this person is saying they really admire me. I feel good, right? We probably all experienced a little of that from time to time on one level or another. Maybe in some realms of our lives, we get lifted up and maybe we're considered really good at something, maybe the best at something, maybe even spiritually. People admire what they see as our sincerity and how devout we are. Maybe somebody sees how generous we are. And you get to the end of life and you're lying there and you know you're going to die soon. And your thought is, everybody liked me. How fulfilling is that? I guess I can't say because I've not come to that moment in my life, and probably I wouldn't actually think that everybody liked me all that much. Everybody has some detractors. But it's just not as comforting a thought, I think, I predict, to be close to death and thinking and being comforted by the fact that whether you necessarily thought well of yourself or not, everybody else thought you were great. How do you feel about admiration of God? That God approves of your life. Well, that feels good, and it is good. Knowing that no matter who is against you, knowing that no matter who has opposed you, who's thought ill of you, that you have lived your life for the Lord and confident that He approves of you, that's a source of comfort. That God knows you have integrity, that God knows you've had good influence in a world where it's needed, that you can be content with how you've lived and you can anticipate the Lord saying, well done, good and faithful servant. Whose admiration do we want more? Well, when you pose it like this, of course, every one of us, I think, in this room would say, well, I want God's approval more, right? Yeah. But do we always live that way? That we want God's approval more than men? Would any religious person make the wrong choice? Would any religious person who believes in God actually treasure more the words of men than the approval of God? Yeah. And they did it, and Jesus talked about it. He talked about that problem of religious leaders wanting and pursuing the approval of men more than the approval of God. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 23. Matthew 23, we're first going to notice verse 5, where Jesus says that they do all their deeds to be noticed by men. Who's he talking about? Well, back to verse 2, he's talking about the scribes and the Pharisees. The Pharisees, who everybody looked at and thought, well, they're the holy men. I maybe don't like all the things that they do, or maybe I don't like some of their attitude, but they're the holy men. And the scribes, the ones who spend all their time copying the scriptures, among other things. And Jesus talks about them and says they do all their deeds to be noticed by men. For they broaden their phylacteries and lengthen the tassels of their garments. Those were things on their robes that were markings of spiritual endeavors they had engaged in and how holy, therefore, they were. And they would make sure that everybody sees they've got these things on their robes that shows how spiritually involved they are. Because they want the people to see. They want the people to approve. Verses 6 and 7. And they love the place of honor at the banquets and the chief seats in the synagogues and respectful greetings in the marketplaces and being called by men rabbi. You go to a wedding and you get seated, if it's one of these sit-down dinner receptions, and your seat you've been assigned is kind of at a table way back in the corner. It's like, oh man, I wanted to be right up there in the middle, next to the table of the bride and groom. I wanted to be up there, and I kind of wanted people to see that I was up there. I'm one of their really good, close friends. I wanted people to see that. They were like that, these scribes and the Pharisees. And they loved the respectful greetings in the marketplaces and being called by men rabbi. Be walking through the market in Jerusalem and have everyone coming up to you and saying, oh, Rabbi so-and-so, it's so good to see you today. People craved that kind of thing. These scribes and the Pharisees craved that kind of thing. People are still like that. People still do those things. People make big donations to a hospital, and one of the reasons they do is because they get their name on the wing of that hospital, right? Yeah, that was me. I funded that. Or, I'm aware of a congregation in another part of the country. A fellow died and he left a piece of property that the church could build a church building on, with the requirement that they call that congregation, I'll say Smith instead of what his actual name was, the Smith Memorial Church of Christ. He wanted his name on it. He wanted to be remembered for the fact that he donated the land so that that church could build a building there. I tell you, if there's somebody we ought to be memorializing when we build a church building, it's Jesus, who died for us, not the guy who left some money that he wasn't going to need anymore after he was dead. But people want that honor. Maybe we like to hear our name mentioned in a sermon. That depends on the point being made. But maybe we want to be used as a positive example of something in a sermon. And for everybody to hear that, the preacher said, that's a good example. And maybe we like that kind of thing. I remember from the different perspective, from the preaching perspective, when I was in college, at Florida College, probably you're aware Florida College is run by Christians. Most of the students are Christians, and they hold a lectureship every year, and I've enjoyed going to that lectureship many times. But I remember when I was a student there, that several of us were talking one evening, and another guy who wanted to preach said his goal, his big goal, is one day to be invited to speak at the Florida College lectures, to speak in front of all the guests that come. It's not the goal of preaching, but you'll look good up there. People have the wrong goals in mind, and they want the approval and the admiration of the wrong people. And Jesus confronts it. He confronts it back in Matthew chapter 6, not just in Matthew chapter 23, but back in Matthew chapter 6. And that's where we're going to be for most of the rest of the lesson. Matthew chapter 6. It begins in chapter 6, verse 1. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. You'll have a reward, but it's just the reward you were looking for, that people will admire you. But you won't have the admiration, the reward of your Father. The reason you've been doing righteous things is to be seen by men, that's not what the Lord wants. And if we're worried about impressing other people, if we're worried about impressing men, you can get caught up in that and not have any reward with the Father because you're just concerned with really serving yourself in order for others to see and admire you. And so if we think back to chapter 23 for just a moment, in verse 12, whoever exalts himself will be humbled. Whoever humbles himself, he will be exalted. So let's read here in chapter 6, verses 1 through 18, and then we'll go back and discuss this passage. Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. When therefore you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give alms, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your alms may be in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will repay you. And when you pray, you're not to be as the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners in order to be seen by men. Truly I say to you that they have their reward in full. But you, when you pray, go into your inner room, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in secret. Your Father who sees in secret will repay you. And when you are praying, don't use meaningless repetitions as the Gentiles do, for they suppose that they will be heard for their many words. Therefore do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Pray then in this way. Our Father who's in heaven, hallowed be your name. May your kingdom come, and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And don't lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. For if you forgive one another for their transgressions, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men, then your Father will not forgive your transgressions. And whenever you fast, don't put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do, for they neglect their appearance in order to be seen fasting by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you fast, anoint your head, wash your face, so that you may not be seen fasting by men, but by your Father who is in secret. Your Father who sees in secret will repay you. So this lengthy passage on this topic of seeking the reward from men, seeking the admiration of men, the approval of men, the praise of men, versus just serving God and wanting his approval. So we're going to talk about these three things, these three aspects of service that many of the people in Jesus' day were doing mainly so that other people would see them doing it and admire them. And Jesus is saying, no, these are good things to do, but you need to be doing them for the Lord, not for being seen. So in verses 2 through 4, he talks about giving alms, giving contributions, giving money, in their case, into the treasury of the temple, so that it would help people, so that it would help the priests, so that it would help others, giving of our means to help others. And Jesus says about this, when you give alms, don't sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be honored by men. I'm not sure if they literally did this. I wouldn't be surprised if they literally did this, if they're on their way to make a contribution, a donation, and they have somebody in front of them blowing a horn. Here's Rabbi so-and-so, here's Pharisee so-and-so going to make his donation. But I'm not sure it was literal. I'm not sure Jesus is saying they literally did that. But like our expression, when somebody's blowing their own horn, it doesn't mean that they actually have a French horn there and they're blowing it. It means they're just letting everybody see, here's what I'm doing. And at the very least, the scribes and the Pharisees were doing that. And so Jesus says, no, don't do that. Jesus says at the end of verse 2 that when they do that, they have their reward. What does that mean, that they have their reward? In full. They have their reward in full. Is God rewarding them for what they've done? Now, that's not the reward they were seeking. They were seeking that people would admire them. And Jesus says, you don't get that. People will look at that person. People will look at the person who funds the hospital wing. People will look at the person who gave the property for the church building and wants his name on it. People will look at all of those people and say, that's so good. And that's the reward they were seeking, and that's the reward Jesus says they get in full. But does that reward matter? Not really. And so Jesus says, when you give alms, verse 3, don't even let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And I've heard, at least once I've heard somebody think, how can I be that secretive about it? Well, Jesus is exaggerating here. He's using some hyperbole about not letting your right hand know what your left hand is doing. Your right hand can't know anything. It doesn't have a brain. Jesus is just saying, don't advertise it to everybody. Not even your best friend. Don't advertise, hey, I went and donated so much to such a cause or to the church. Not even one hand know what the other hand is doing. It's an exaggeration. It's hyperbole to get a point across. Don't advertise what you've done to help others. Don't make a point when you've done some good thing to make sure somehow everybody finds out that you did that thing. Don't just quietly do your generous acts and make your contributions. And God will reward you. But it's terrible that even churches will use that evil desire to be seen in order to increase contributions. A friend of mine, a brother in the church down in Georgia, told me about a church he was familiar with. I think it was a denominational church. I hope it wasn't the church of our brethren. Who, for the contribution, they would have people walk to the front and drop their contribution in a basket at the front. Actually, in two baskets at the front. And the basket on this side was if you were giving under a certain amount of money, and the basket on this side was if you were giving over a certain amount of money. That church is using people's pride and using them wanting to be seen, giving a bigger amount, because you know the effect that has on people. Oh, I don't want to walk up to the one on that side because everybody will know I didn't give as much as the people on this. Church is using that evil desire in people to make more contributions. I was walking out of Walmart one day in that same city, just coincidentally, and found a piece of paper in the parking lot, and I picked it up, and it was from some church in town, and it was probably January, I don't remember now, but from what the piece of paper was, I suspect it was like January, February, and it had all the names of the people of that congregation and the totals they had contributed during the previous year printed out. Well, if you know it's going to be published, well, I want people to see that I gave more, so you'll give more. And that's maybe the motivation of the church publishing a list of who gave how much. Just playing on people's evil desire to give in order to be seen by men. Well, Jesus, after talking about giving alms and how you go about that, should you go about it to be seen by men, or should you just quietly do your good deeds and make your contributions? Jesus next turns to the topic of prayer and how people deal with that sometimes. So verses 5 through 7. And when you pray, you are not to be as the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners, in order to be seen by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you pray, go into your inner room, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. Mark, could you meet me halfway with the book that's on that pew? I left it there, thank you, because I thought, well, that's not my Bible or my outline, I don't need it. But I brought it because I need it. This is a commentary on the New Testament, but it's using writings of the ancient Jews to shed light on what the New Testament passages are talking about. So here, Jesus says, actually, I think it's going to be a moment before I do need it. Yeah, it's going to be a moment before I need it. Got ahead of myself there. I panicked when I realized I didn't have the book up here with me. So pray. Jesus says they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners in order to be seen by men. One ancient rabbi was writing about, I don't remember now the context of what he's writing about, but he says, I saw Rabbi Janai standing and praying in the streets of Sippur and going 4 cubits and then praying the additionary prayer. So he's on the street praying, and he stands, and he prays, and he walks about 3 or 4 yards, and he stops and he prays what they call the additionary prayer. So they had an official second prayer. Why not just do all your praying at once? You know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with remembering you need to pray about something you forgot, but this was just something that they would do, and he would do it on the street deliberately, and he would pray this one prayer, and then he'd stop and walk a little bit, and then he'd pray another prayer to be seen. As Jesus says, they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners. And they would pray sometimes just about anything that they would see in the street. They'd walk out on the street. They're going to pray there because they want everybody to see them. And they would spot things that they would then pray about that thing. And they would go a little further and they'd see something. They'd pray about that thing. For the people to see them, pray. How do you feel if somebody that you really care about talks to you and you find out that the reason they were having that conversation with you was just because they wanted somebody else to see them having that conversation? Wouldn't be a good feeling, would it? Well, that's what these people are doing. And Jesus says they got their reward in full. Not a reward from the Lord, but people see them praying and they think, oh, those holy men, those righteous men, they're just praying all the time. But we need to be less interested in promoting ourselves and more in the reward from the Lord. And so verse 6, but you, when you pray, go into your inner room, and when you shut your door, pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. Again, the idea of going into this inner room, or some translations say into a closet, it's not required that you find the smallest room that you can. The point is, go to some private place to pray. Because your goal isn't that people see you, but your goal is to talk with the Lord. Now, we're not required to find a private place. Sometimes you need to pray about something and you're in the middle of a bunch of people. Nehemiah, when he got to see the king of Persia, he prayed right there, just before when the king called on him. He prayed a quick prayer, Lord help me, probably quietly and to himself. It's not a sin to pray where other people see you, but what's your motivation? And then, don't use meaningless repetition, the Lord says in verse 7. When you are praying, do not use meaningless repetition as the Gentiles do, for they suppose that they will be heard for their many words. This is why I needed this book. The Jews wrote about how the Gentiles would pray. And here's a little section, a quotation of the ancient Jews talking about a prayer that the Gentiles would pray. Let the parricide be dragged. Parricide. So parricide is the act of killing one of your parents. Or it can also mean the person who kills one of his parents. And this is what the Gentiles would pray about when there's been a parricide. Let the parricide be dragged, we beseech thee. Augustus, let the parricide be dragged. This is the thing we ask. Let the parricide be dragged. Hear us, Caesar. Let the false accusers be condemned to the lion. Hear us, Caesar. Let the false accusers be condemned to the lion. Hear us, Caesar. Repetition that has no meaning, has no purpose. And that may be the very kind of thing that Jesus is talking about when he says, do not use meaningless repetition as the Gentiles do, for they suppose that they will be heard for their many words. And from that same Jewish writer who's describing how the Gentiles would pray, he says that the Jews themselves would say, everyone who multiplies prayers will be heard. Say it over and over and over again enough times, and the Lord will hear you. Jesus is saying, don't use meaningless repetition. And then he gives them an example where you're just talking with the Lord about things that are on your mind. Hallowed be your name. May your kingdom come. Simple conversation with the Lord. The way some people pray can sound quite impressive. In fact, the Jewish term where we have meaningless repetition sounds like a bunch of the same sounds repeated. Not necessarily the same words, but that term with a couple of words in it includes a lot of the same sounds kind of repeated. It kind of sounds poetic. It came to mean senseless repetition, meaningless repetition. But sometimes we like our prayers to sound impressive. Do we worry about sounding poetic or impressive or just using really nice words? I like the English language, and you can communicate very specifically when you use the words that mean what you're really getting at. But trying to sound impressive in our prayers, and maybe that has affected brethren sometimes when we use phrases and we'll say the same thing, but we'll use 3 or 4 words to say it And we want our prayers to sound very formal. And Jesus is saying here, I think he's saying that none of that matters. We shouldn't be trying to make our prayers sound impressive to one another. We should just be communicating to God in a way that he wants us to communicate with him. And so Jesus just says, pray a simple prayer like the example that he gives. Our Father who's in heaven, hallowed be your name. May your kingdom come, and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That sounds like poetry to us because it's quoted so often and read so often. But if not for that, it's just a simple prayer without a lot of complexity. All right. So after that, Jesus turns to the third aspect of activity in which people sometimes try to show off and be seen by men. Verses 16 through 18. And whenever you fast, do not put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do, for they neglect their appearance in order to be seen fasting by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. So you're fasting, and you don't want to make a big deal and like announce that you're fasting, but you kind of look a little disheveled, and you didn't comb your hair very well, and you don't put on your best clothes, and you look just kind of, yeah, I'm hungry, but I'm fasting. And you're trying to make sure that people notice that you're fasting. Jesus says, that's not what fasting is about. Fasting is supposed to help you stop thinking about earthly things and think about spiritual things, and you're using it to think about earthly pride and whether people notice that you're fasting or not. So comb your hair right, brush your hair right, whatever instrument you use on your hair. And have on fresh clothes and look bathed and clean and just go about your day. Fasting is between you and God. We shouldn't be doing it for earthly gain and for the pride that we have and wanting others to notice the good things that we're doing. Jesus says the ones who fast and put on a gloomy face and neglect their appearance, they have their reward. They have their reward. They don't have God's reward. They have their reward in full. The people notice, oh, Brother so-and-so's fasting today. But that's not a worthwhile reward. And that's why Jesus says, just look normal. Go about your day as you fast. This recurring line through all three of these topics are that they get their reward. But it's only because they were seeking the wrong reward. They're receiving nothing from God. And so as we get ready to close our lesson, I'm turning over to John chapter 5. Verses 37 and 38. John chapter 5, verse 37. And the Father who sent me, he has borne witness of me. You have neither heard his voice at any time nor seen his form. And you don't have his word abiding in you, for you don't believe him whom he sent. And you might be wondering, how's that related to any of this? Verse 44, how can you believe when you receive glory from one another and you do not seek the glory that is from the one and only God? They didn't believe because they weren't primarily, ultimately concerned with seeking God, with knowing God, with understanding God, because they were busy seeking glory from one another. That's why those scribes and Pharisees didn't come to Jesus. They were preoccupied with human glory And so you don't see the glory of the Lord. You're not seeking his glory. So seek the reward of God. Don't worry if people see that you're busy seeking the glory of God. Don't worry if people see the good things you do. Don't worry if people notice that you called brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so when they were sick. Don't worry if people notice the other things that you do. You just do the things that are seeking the glory of God and being faithful children of his. Because we noticed that verse in Matthew chapter 23, although I kind of quoted it without turning to it. Matthew 23, verse 12. That is not the right verse, but that's the verse I have written down. Verse. It is the right verse. I was just looking at the wrong verse. Chapter 23, verse 12. And whoever exalts himself, that's the problem we've been talking about. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled. But the next half of the verse. Whoever humbles himself. I'm just a Christian. I'm just trying to be busy doing the things of the Lord. Doesn't matter if other people notice or not. Whoever humbles himself, he'll be exalted. It's a lesson the Pharisees and scribes needed to learn. It's a lesson Jesus talked about. And it's a lesson sometimes we need to remember better than we do. We're about to stand and sing our song of invitation about the day that is coming, the day when the Lord comes back, the day when he comes in glory, in his glory, and he'll take home with him those who are faithful. If you have some need to come before us this evening, we've asked you to do so as we stand and sing.
Let us pray.